Welcome to another episode of Judge for Yourself. The tragic death of IFP MP Dr. Maury Ambrosini has put the subject of euthanasia firmly in the spotlight again. Dr. Ambrosini was suffering from terminal cancer and recently took his own life. Activists say Ambrosini and others suffering from terminal illness should be given the option to decide how and when to die. Dignity South Africa is planning to take the matter to the Constitutional Court to legalise assisted suicide. If you would like to join this debate on Twitter, please use the hashtag JFYEuthanasia. Now, in the studio to discuss this topic, I'm joined by Taryn Hodgson from the Christian Action Network, Dr. Charles Juler of Doctors for Life, and Helena Dolny, chairperson of Dignity SA. Perhaps I should start with you, and I know you Dr. Dolny as well, but not a medical doctor, if I'm right.
That's right.
Right, let me say it. So you determined, your organisation determined to take this to court in order that our law should allow, active euthanasia? So
Dignity SA is a public education and lobbying organisation. Right. And we would see that we were concerned with a basket of things, and I think the Constitutional Court is not the first stop. We are of the opinion and submit that the present legislation predates the Constitution and is not aligned with it. And we will be looking for 3 changes. One would be on end-of-life directives, that currently you express your wishes, what you'd like to happen if you are very ill or if you're in a car accident, that we would like those to be legally binding. At the moment, it's a guideline that serves your doctor. He's not legally bound to respect your wishes, which is not the case in other countries. Well, I think it's more than that. I don't think he's allowed to. No, in terms of not being put on life support, he could respect your wishes. That's a passive, but let's just distinguish. Yeah. See, what I'm trying to establish is, are we debating active euthanasia, where I put in, let's say, a living will, that if I contract Dr. Ambrosini's condition, I'm terminally ill, is your argument that in that particular case, if I wish to die, a doctor is prepared consciously, I mean, obviously, some doctors may have that they don't want to, but a doctor's prepared to, would actually administer a drug or something and allow me to die with dignity? Or is this a passive case where I just turn off the life support? I'm trying to establish what it is that you use the phrase, allow me to die with dignity. And so, yes, we would support a doctor giving the drugs to assist the person to die more quickly. So just for the purposes of my viewers, before I ask my other 2 guests, for example, in Holland, in 2002, they passed a law to that effect. Yes. Now, is that what you'd be wanting, something similar in South Africa? Yes, to decriminalise the assistance to die for somebody who is terminally ill. And Taryn, you oppose that?
Yes, we believe there's a big moral divide between letting someone die, letting nature take its course, and making someone die, which we would say is murder. So
why would you want me, if I was terminally ill and there'd be no hope, to live in unspeakable pain for another year, if I consciously said, I can't bear this anymore, I want to die?
Well, we need to always recognize that when voluntary euthanasia is legalized, it's a huge slippery slope to involuntary euthanasia. In Belgium, 120 nurses admitted in a research report published in the Canadian Medical Journal that they had euthanized patients without their consent, or even without the consent of the relatives.
Well, that's criminal, but I'm saying, what I'm trying to establish is...
But that's exactly the slippery slope.
So I'm trying to establish what your opposition to what Helena's talking about. Would it be a practical one, or is it a moral one?
It's both.
Or both?
Because we believe that we should address the pain, address depression issues, and Christians have always been at the forefront of providing help and support for those who are dying or disabled or the elderly. Why can't I have autonomy? Well,
it's my life.
What ends up happening is, what about the right to life of those who are being euthanized without their consent, or the doctors who will be pressurized?
But that's a practical as opposed to a moral question. My moral
but it is a moral issue either way.
So are you objecting to moral grounds? You say, I don't have an autonomy.
That he can be incredibly suffering, that he can be in extreme pain, but he doesn't have autonomy to say, I am ready to die. And
Well,
I'm afraid that the evidence isn't there for slippery slope in Washington.
Well, so are you saying
ago.
those nurses in Belgium who the 120 nurses who admitted to euthanizing patients without their consent, and also Holland has also experienced this, where a Dutch professor, Theo Boer, who used to support euthanasia, now says it's been a terrible mistake and assisted suicide is becoming a normal procedure now.
Doctor, what do you have to say?
Well, I think that, you know, in a democratic society, autonomy is a very important pillar, but I think it can be taken too far. And I think that we have to realize a right for one person is a right for everyone. So if you claim the right to end your own life because of pain, you are then insinuating that everybody else has the same right.
No, I'm not at all. What I'm trying to ask you is, what I'm trying to establish is, if I want, I'm not use I don't want to sort of put the me, but it's, take someone like Dr. Ambasini, who was the backdrop to this program and who I'm desperately conscious about because he was here not that long ago. Take somebody like that. They're terminally ill. No doctor, every doctor says, there's nothing more we can do for you other than giving you morphine or something of that kind. I'm in terrible pain. I'm in utter hopelessness. Why should I not be able to say, I want to die with dignity?
I think that the desire to die is an integral part of the dying process, and it can be a phase of depression through where mistaken desire to die can prematurely be made.
But if I consciously do it before that?
You see,
if I give a living will when I'm absolutely conscious, I'm consciously now, nothing wrong with me.
My own experience was living with someone with cancer for 4 years, and 3 years and 11 months of those were a delight. And I would say that there was true quality of life and participation and joy.
But doesn't that support their point? That
the last month was unbearable.
Yes,
and there was not depression. There was not depression. It was that every avenue of medical intervention was closed. It had been tried, and you were in a waiting game and suffering unbearably.
Or I want to give you both a chance. I promise. I have to take a break, and then when we come back, I'll give you both a chance to reply. Welcome back. I know, Taryn, you wanted to reply to Dr. Dolman.
As my doctor over here can testify to, is that patients do go through different stages. They may go through periods where they feel as if they want to die, and then their circumstances may change, and they beat all predictions. They maybe even they want to see their son graduate or something like that. So they can go through different periods.
Are you suggesting there's not a point? Doctor, let me ask you this in relation to that. There is a point where doctors would say there is no longer any hope. It happens all the time.
Yes, that is the case, and I think doctors are often misquoted. I think patients interpret that. I've actually never heard a doctor saying that in my presence, there's no hope, because we have more painkillers, we have more analgesics, we have more palliative care than we've ever had before.
That doctors don't say, in all due honesty, the level of, let's say, cancer is so now ridden through the body that we have no longer anything other than make the patient comfortable and hopefully give them some level of dignity in a hospice.
That is true. In other words,
you may be right.
They would never say there's no hope, go home and die, unless they're very overworked and burnt out, which is possible.
But then let me ask you this. What about Taryn's
point? 1,000 doctors in the UK were surveyed. 2/3 of them said that they were not comfortable with talking to patients about end-of-life decisions. That's an astonishing
Well,
statistic.
maybe that's because they feel like they're going to be pressurized to doing something against their conscience.
What we would like is different training for
But
doctors.
can I ask you, what about the point that A decides to take his own life, and the truth about it is that at some particular point in time, miraculously, as we hear from time to time, maybe miraculous, that person actually lives for much longer. Has a serious quality of life. I mean, I know that the person you're talking about, and I think the country deserves to know this, was Joe Slovo, is one of the great South Africans, certainly of the 20th century. And the point I'm simply making is, you said you had 3 and so many years with him, and I recall meeting him on numerous occasions when he was larger than life, even though he was probably dying. Now, if we kind of took that situation, when would one decide to turn it off, as it were, even though he had been diagnosed? Wouldn't one want to have had those 3.5 years with him?
The person themselves makes a decision. So in Joe's case, I think a month before he died, he fell, he broke his collarbone. He already knew that there were no avenues of treatment in terms of bone marrow
So you're suggesting
cancer.
he'd be the person who would make the decision?
That is always the case
So-
with the sister
so
dying.
Taryn, can I just ask you
this?
Weber.
So can I just, sorry?
Andrew Lloyd Webber filled out the forms for Dignitas, a euthanasia clinic in Switzerland. When he was going through a severe period of depression, he had had a lot of operations. But now he said that was a terrible mistake. He said,
But there's a big difference between that. If you take the
he
Dutch,
doesn't want to die
if
anymore.
you take the Dutch version, that you've got to actually persist in your request. That's apart from all the other criteria about panel of doctors and review panels, etc. This is not a cavalier thing. But if you, I mean, let me put this to you. Jonathan Glover is one of the great ethicists who's written about this. Writes as follows: to refuse to provide help to commit suicide is a very serious denial of a person's autonomy over the matter of his own life and her own life and death, and is only to be justified by powerful arguments appealing either to the future quality of life or to side effects. Now, that doesn't seem to be what you're arguing.
Definitely
you're arguing
not.
much more than that.
Because he's going directly against the Hippocratic Oath, which is our fundamental ethic, our moral fibre for both the Christians, Jews, and Muslim people. In other words, our striving is all to heal and to help
But you
towards
can't
a
heal
natural
anymore.
end.
You failed. The truth about it is that medical science has run out. You
That's
have
where we
nothing
need
left.
palliative care. Now, palliative care is comfort care. It's driven the hospice movement, which is now represented in almost all countries of the world, even rural areas, founded by Dame Cicely Saunders in England.
Mm-hmm.
And palliative care is now an integral part of modern medical student training. They have to pass it. They have to know about pain control. I even teach them.
Can I just ask you this, though? As a doctor, have you never been confronted by a person who's in such agony, so unspeakably ill, has absolutely, you know they've got no hope of continuing beyond a few months, and if that person said, please put me out of my agony, have you seriously not had any qualms about that at all?
No, we wouldn't give something to end their life. We would give something to alleviate their pain.
But you can't, because sometimes you can't alleviate their pain. You know that as well as I do.
I would argue with that, because modern pain combinations are very, very...
Well, what's the quality of life then?
You see, it all depends on your definition of quality of life. We are mistakenly based quality of life on independence and autonomy. I would say a large number of people do not have quality of life into that definition. All our vulnerable, our mentally handicapped, our demented patients, they do not have quality of life under that definition.
Quality of life in a situation where you're dying, there is absolutely nothing you can do, even on your own definition, other than to give them a palliative drug, which you have no idea whether it in fact takes away all the pain, since you aren't lying there.
You have to see the interconnectedness of a person with his family and his society, because no one lives alone and dies alone. No man is an island.
All right.
We have to look at the family dynamics around a dying patient, because it has been shown, studies, that a person can't die in peace if their families are warring and feuding.
Okay.
If you can help counseling, support the family, improve pain control, bring in spiritual support. Studies have shown that
Person's
people's
an atheist,
fears
doesn't want any spiritual
affect
support.
physical pain. They fear abandonment. They fear loss of bodily function. They haven't been counseled about what happens to their body. They haven't made a will. All these things need to be helped. The autonomy of a person is multifaceted.
So let me ask you this, on that particular basis, if what the doctor's saying is correct, surely the family and others have a say in this too?
So
What is being suggested is that autonomy is a qualified proposition, whatever Glover may say.
So one of the really important things in what I understand from family counselling, having done the hospice training myself, and I went to America and did a course in rites of passage guides, so I absolutely agree with the systemic approach. I do respect autonomy. That is ultimate. The person must freely choose, because you wouldn't want a situation where a person feels that they're an inconvenience.
But where do we draw the
pressurised.
line? Where do we draw
Exactly.
the
What about the autonomy of those who don't want to be euthanized?
Ambrosini's family were totally supportive. It's very clear.
line? Do you
from
accept that a
Ambrosini-
family is ambivalent about this and divided, that you can't do it?
And what about the greedy relatives
I'll
who
come
want
to you,
to
yeah,
get their
yeah.
get the inheritance from this person they perceive to be economic burden.
My autonomy is supreme, as you think.
Trumps the rest of the family.
Yes, because I am the one who is in the seat of dying, and I am considering that my life no longer has quality.
Taryn, why would you deny that autonomy? Isn't that central?
What
to
about
life?
the autonomy, the right to life of those who are being euthanized in Belgium and Holland at this moment without their consent? Over 120 nurses admitted to doing this, and the report admits that this is probably a lot more than has been admitted, because they're scared of admitting this.
Possibly, but let me put this to you. There's not one law that we draft in this country on any particular issue that isn't broken because of corrupt people, because of dishonest people, because of criminal people. You're not suggesting that we tear up the law because of that. What you're suggesting, presumably, is that we imprison those people who depart from the law. That doesn't justify abolishing the law.
No, but the sanctity of life is absolutely
okay,
crucial.
now we get into the rub of it.
From conception to natural death.
Okay, now we get into the rub of it, but we've got to take a break and I'll come back. We'll come back. So Doctor, we ended with this point about the sanctity of life. Isn't that the underlying normative position that you're coming from?
Absolutely.
That you believe that not even an individual has the ultimate say over his or her own life. Is that where you're coming from?
Look,
I think I'm going to ask Taryn the same question.
Yes, you know, the thing is, we don't often say it because it's an assumption. The trust of a doctor and a patient is based on the fact that that patient assumes that the doctor will never do anything to harm him, would never do anything to hasten his death. So it's an unspoken trust.
Are you
do you know that
that
people in
doctors
Holland
from time to
don't
time
trust the doctors? They have cards to say, if I fall and I'm unconscious, do not euthanize me. It's prevalent in Holland, and it could happen
here. There's a lot of studies about Holland which seem to say it works pretty well. More than 4,500 people a year go that route, and my research doesn't seem to indicate that it's... I mean, of course there are problems, but...
But you see, it's not just older people, it's now children. Do you know that in Holland and Belgium, if you're a 12-year-old, you can give consent to end your own life?
No, in Holland you can't. You've got to get your parents between 12 to 16.
Well, not according to my literature.
Well,
from the
then I
Doctors
think
for
you
Life.
better check the Act.
In other words, the slippery slope has included...
I don't know about Belgium. It may well be right there. But I checked on Holland this morning.
Belgium.
And let me put this to you. Let's assume that was the case,
Yeah.
that it was the parents who decided to do that. I mean, if you're sitting there with a child who's in unspeakable pain and you've come to the dreadful conclusion that there's nothing more to be done for this child, and the doctors agree, and there's a review panel of doctors, all of whom agree, why would you say that in that situation it wouldn't be right?
You know why? And I'm going to quote a very controversial subject here, and that is the AIDS epidemic. Before we had treatment for HIV, parents in countries, in our own country, walked away from their children because there was no treatment for them. If you were to legalize or to assume that that was the norm, you would not pursue research for HIV medication. You would not be driven to maternal child prevention, which has saved millions of lives.
Are you suggesting that there's been less research in places like Holland than otherwise would be the case?
With HIV, yes. Because
Really?
we have
And
a
what
legacy,
evidence
a
do you
very
have-
shameful legacy.
What evidence do you have that in Holland they would have done less research on HIV because of euthanasia?
Because they don't have HIV patients of the same magnitude
Oh,
that
well,
we have.
so we don't have any evidence about it. It's just
we,
your
have
speculation.
we are the epicenter for HIV, and we have a very shameful legacy of children and people
I
being
accept
thrown
that.
away and dropped down a hole because they had HIV.
So Helena,
Yes,
what
exactly.
what
It's
about
that
that? I mean,
economic
isn't that a
burden.
problem?
Yes.
They believe in
That in fact, if we do have euthanasia, particularly in relation to children, terminally ill children, we may well, in fact, engender a culture of carelessness, thoughtlessness, or even worse. That's, I think, what's being suggested.
Yes. We have enough
Sorry,
demoralization.
I appreciate it. I've got the point. I wanted to give her a chance. Yeah.
I think going back to your own point, that abuse of something doesn't invalidate a law. It's getting better at implementing a law. And I want to go to the Constitution and Section 10 around human dignity and Section 11 around life and freedom and security. And it seems to me that our law is out of sync. And
Although most countries don't have this, do they? I mean, we've been citing European countries, but how many countries have an act of euthanasia piece of legislation?
we're on about 8 at the moment.
8.
Yeah.
What
Right.
about the right to life in our Constitution that should protect all human beings, including the preborn and the elderly.
I understand that. What I'm troubled by is you've made a lot of arguments which I think one has to think very carefully about. I suppose what I'm really asking you is, can you not envisage cases where there's no right to life because, well, there's a right to life, but there's also a right to autonomy. And I can decide, like Dr. Ambrosini did, to end my life because I cannot bear the pain anymore. And I want somebody to, in a sense, assist me in this. Because I just cannot. I'm conscious, I understand. I'm sitting here and I'm saying to you, I'm 100% compos mentis. Try as many doctors you like, come back tomorrow, the next day, and next month. I'll still have the same position. And the next month, I've still got the same position. And you say no. What gives you the right to tell me no?
And yet we've got cases like Andrew Lloyd Webber who wanted
that's
to die.
Depression.
He had filled out
I'm
the
not talking about
papers and then he
depression.
changed
I'm talking about assuming that you've got a panel of doctors who diagnose the person as being absolutely beyond
what
any.
When you legalize
Ambrosini
murder, voluntary euthanasia always leads
So
to involuntary
why should you,
euthanasia.
Taryn, have a right over me?
It does. It's happened in Holland. It's happened in Belgium.
In
It'll happen here too.
In Washington, if you could let me finish a sentence, 50,000 deaths per year in the last 3 years. That's 150,000 deaths. 255 people have requested prescriptions. And of those 255, only 60 people decided to use the prescriptions. That is not evidence of a slippery slope.
So
and
you haven't provided any information about Holland or Belgium, though, where there is this slippery slope.
I looked at the statistics on Holland and Belgium, and I could not see your figure work. I could
what
see
about
you making
this report
but
in
not
the Canadian
figure
Medical Association of the 120 nurses who admitted to euthanizing patients without their consent?
But now, why is it, what I'm troubled by that, I think that's a very worrying problem. But is that enough to trump the principle? Because I come back to your point, what you're really ultimately saying, which is a moral position, is you believe in the autonomy.
Well, it's an amoral position.
Why is it an amoral position?
Well, you're trying to force your amorality onto us.
No, just hang on,
to
mate.
those who don't want euthanasia in this country.
Sorry.
I believe in compassion.
Well, so do I, but I don't want an amoral position
Why
forced
is her
onto
position
us.
amoral when it basically says the trump here is individual autonomy? That's a moral position. Yours, on the other hand, is sanctity of life. What we're dealing with is two moral claims. You can't say one is amoral and one is moral. The question which you've got to do is how do we resolve that?
Yes, and who gets to decide is a very important
Well,
issue.
why should you decide? That's what I'm saying.
Well, why should she decide
Because it's
either?
her life.
I'm not deciding.
Well,
I'm saying the
you're
person decides for
you're
themselves.
promoting euthanasia, and all law enforces someone's morality. You see.
Are you not encouraging something?
All common
Helena?
law comes from moral values.
All right,
And so
I got you.
all law
Helena, but
enforces
how do you
morality
respond to
of
that?
some sort.
That
So Dr. Ambrosini was in a wheelchair. I understand he was on a breathing machine. I understand that he couldn't feed himself. I understand that he was in incredible pain. I understand he had had 17 months of treatment. And he was a man that wanted to live. He had a 7-year-old son.
Desperately, he was
desperately
sitting where
wanted
you
to
were.
live. Yes. And he reached the end of his road.
So-
and I would like to live in a country that respects
then let's
Doctor,
get
autonomy.
sorry, let me give
associations
Doctor.
more
No, Doctor, you've been
support.
very patient. I want to ask you, how do you respond to someone like Dr. Ambrosini, who says, "I've done everything. He even took drugs. He did alternative medicine. He tried absolutely everything. I want to live." He sat here and said that, and then
I think
finally
it's
he
a-
got to a position. Would you deny him that right?
I would involve specialists and multidisciplinary expertise because I think that's an exceptional patient and we shouldn't use an exception to make a rule.
But what do you say about him? Do you think he was wrong to take his own life?
I wouldn't say wrong, it's the deed is done, but I would have gone into more detail about his depression. Do you know that only 10% of people have been psychiatrically evaluated who wanted to die? Only 10%. In other words, we misinterpret depression as it's frustration. It's not
But we're
frustration.
not talking about that. We're talking about the purpose. Anyway, I mean,
Let's
unfortunately,
deal
I've been
with
told,
the
I
depression
appreciate that. We'll have to get you all back because I have run out of time, which is a pity because this is a terribly
pain,
important...
not the patient.
Sorry, thank you. But I have to end. This is an exquisitely difficult question, and I suppose when we try to distill it to its essence, what we have seen is, leave all the practicalities aside, all laws have practical problems attached to them. what we've got here is a sense of a moral clash between those who believe on the autonomy of a person to be able to determine their own life, including death, as part of the essential core of dignity, and those who believe that there's a sanctity of life which in a sense trumps even that notion of autonomy. And you've got to be able to resolve that one way or another in order to resolve this question as to whether euthanasia should be justified in South Africa or not. How do you balance that? Judge for yourself. Goodbye.